Happy New Year and welcome back to the Tabletop's Edge. No, it's not quite January 1st out, but it is January-February 1937 in our combined World in Flames Days of Decision campaign. Now, we wrapped up 1936 last time out. It was a bit of a slow year. I think the biggest event was probably the Italian conquest of Ethiopia, and the fascists spent most of the rest of the year just concentrating on adding as many resources through peaceful and diplomatic means as possible, while the democracies looked to be relying more on collective security as they started to sign some treaties that would eventually hopefully lead to closer ties between them in the event of a conflict in the future with either the fascists or the communists. Now, we expect 1937 to see things start to speed up a little bit, and that's because in 1936 the real limiting factor was money and build points and the lack thereof for really all of the major powers. None of them really had much production going that would allow them to do big expansions of their military or even do a lot of political and diplomatic activities. That looks to be changing here in 1937 and probably fairly early in the year as a couple of the fascist powers, Italy and Japan, are poised to do their first gear up, which is going to see them increasing their production and thus making them a little bit more capable of further adventurism. So how is this year going to unfold? Well, let's just dive right in and see how it starts. First off, a few administrative things. We have a couple of corrections from last episode. First, I forgot to deduct the 4 money cost for the minor economic agreement that Germany signed with Sweden. So rather than having 5 Reichsmarks going into January, February, Germany actually only has a total of 1. Now, she had the money to spend, and it's not going to have changed anything that we have seen. I just merely updated Germany's on-hand money right now to reflect the proper amount. The second oversight. Last episode you heard me talk about the democratic elections, and we saw France hold an election in September, October of 1936. Now, the democracies have a range of years in which they are required to hold an election. All of them, that is, except for the United States, which must hold an election specifically in the November-December 1936, 1940, and 1944 turns. And in my push to finish out the year, I forgot to have the United States actually hold that election. And unlike the other elections, not holding the United States election in the required specific turn does have some effects. The Republicans automatically win the election, which then has a detrimental effect or a dampening effect on all U.S. entry effects moving forward. So the United States did not want to allow that to happen. They would have definitely wanted to hold the election. They were capable of holding the election. So after filming, I kind of caught that mistake, went back and corrected that. So what happened was the United States did in fact end up bidding 1 bid point in November, December, and by virtue of their initiative position modifier had a total of 4 for their bid, which actually put them, as you can see here, in first place in November, December. Whereupon they selected the U.S. 0, I think it's C option to hold the election. They held the election. There's no minor country influence. There's no U.S. entry impact. They don't even get to activate a minor country. So there was absolutely 0 impact on what transpired elsewhere. The only issue was whether or not the U.S. moving into first place in the political phase would have caused the phase to end early before Italy and Japan could have selected their options. And fortunately, the United States did roll higher than a 1, which meant Italy could then go ahead and select the option she did, which was increase bid points. She managed to roll higher than a 2, which allowed Japan to also increase her bid points. So there was no real change or impact to anything that we saw in last episode, but I did want to mention that and show the corrections here, and that also leaves the United States with -$1 heading into January, February because of the 1 they had to pay for the bid. Now, that pretty much takes care of everything from last episode. I did want to take a couple of minutes to talk about the bonus bid points with regards to the political effectiveness, and this has caused some confusion among a number of viewers, so I want to take a minute here and kind of explain how this is going to be implemented through this playthrough. When I began the playthrough, I was awarding the bonus bid points to the major powers that had bid to play a political option, but had the political phase end prior to them having an opportunity to play an option, and only to those major powers. That's the way the rules were worded in 2nd edition Days of Decision, and they're also the way the rules are worded in section 5.d of 3rd edition Days of Decision, which is the edition we are using here. However, in Rule Section 8.6, it repeats the same language that you find in 5.d, and which matches the previous edition of Days of Decision, but it also adds one little clause that says even if the major powers did not bid. So what that says, 8.6 says that if the political phase ends, that every major power that did not play a political option is supposed to get bonus bid points equal to their political effectiveness, even if they did not bid. Now, I have a little bit of an issue with that. When I saw the discrepancy, I began to implement the discrepancy and play this per the 8.6 rule, but it just doesn't feel right to me. The way I interpret the rules and the intent is that the bonus bid points are a form of compensation, if you will, for the major powers that actually bid and spent money to bid and yet were denied an opportunity to play a political option. So rather than just giving the bonus bid points to a major power if they bid 0 and did not bid, that would allow major powers to simply say, all right, I'm not going to bid, I'm going to save my money, bid 0, and I'm going to get a certain number of bonus points for next turn. It sort of undermines the usefulness of the option that we saw Italy and Japan just play in November, December 36, where you actually bid for and play the option to increase your bid points. Now in that case they are getting double, but in many cases that's going to mean maybe 2 or 3 more than you would get by simply bidding 0. I don't really like the feel of that, and so what we'll do is we're going to institute a house rule, if you will. And for those of you that are longtime WiFCE players, you'll know that it's not World in Flames unless you are house ruling something. What I'm going to do is use my interpretation of the rule that states that if the political phase ends early, if, for example, we had 6 major powers all bid and pay for their bids, and the political phase ends up ending prematurely here after, say, the 3rd power plays a political option, the bonus bid points are only going to be awarded to the 3 powers here in this example that bid but did not get to play a political option. The 2 powers down here that bid 0 will not receive any bid points. Any major power that does not bid will never receive these bonus bid points from their political effectiveness. They will, of course, always get the modifier for their initiative position. That's pretty straightforward. But again, for me, I see the bonus bid points as a way to compensate these major powers that are spending cash and then kind of getting screwed out of the opportunity to do something. So with giving the bonus bid points to every major power, whether they bid or not, just doesn't seem quite right to me, because you have major powers that bid because they wanted to do something and then they actually got to play an option, and then you have major powers that didn't want to do anything and bid 0, and of course they got to do what they wanted to do, which was nothing. And it's only these powers that wanted to do something and yet were denied the opportunity to do that. So the game sort of awards these bonus bid points to give them an opportunity to get a lower position in the following turn, to give them a better chance of doing what they were trying to do in the turn where the phase ended early on them. So from here on out, and again, I'll say this is my interpretation. I've explained sort of my rationale for why I'm going to do it this way. I am perfectly open to the idea that my interpretation is incorrect. And if there's anybody out there that has any insight as to why the third edition of Days of Decision includes that little clause referencing even major powers that did not bid, please let me know in the comments. I'll be more than happy to educate myself further on this particular issue, but for the purposes of this playthrough, what we're going to see is bonus bid points only awarded to major powers that actually bid and did not get to play an option. Now, speaking of house rules, we'll consider this one house rule. There is one other house rule that I do want to talk about now, and for that we're going to go over to the map here briefly. The second house rule that I'm going to be implementing in this playthrough concerns convoy points and how the convoy pipelines are handled. Now, convoy points were introduced first when Ships in Flames appeared in 1995, I believe it was, as part of an expansion to the 5th edition of World in Flames. Prior to convoy points, you had convoy markers, which were the backside of your transport units. And near the beginning of the turn, after reinforcements, there was the convoy pipeline placement segment, where each major power would decide whether or not they were going to flip over any of their transports to their convoy side, and then they would place the convoy marker in the C zone. You would need a string of convoy markers across C zones in order to transport resources through that C zone. Now, a convoy marker had no capacity, so a convoy marker would be able to transport anything from a single resource to 60 or 70 resources, whatever you have in the game. The introduction of convoy points, I think, was a good idea. I like the concept of bringing convoy points and some capacity into the pipelines. But I do have an issue with giving these convoy points movement and range values. They seem like they are attempting to treat these convoy points like a regular ship counter, and that's really that just doesn't work. It's not right. So, as an example, what I'm talking about here, we have a regular ship here, a surface ship, HMS Norfolk. This represents a single heavy cruiser, HMS Norfolk, and maybe a couple of escorting destroyers, but it is a discrete ship that can only be in one location over the course of a turn. If Norfolk starts in Halifax here, it will sail into the East Coast, it goes into the North Atlantic, and if I place it into one of the sections of the sea box in the North Atlantic, it's going to spend the balance of the turn until it's either aborted or sunk or voluntarily returned to base, patrolling the North Atlantic sea zone here. Convoy points don't do that. These convoy points, each convoy point represents, I think it's 500,000 tons of merchant shipping, which is a large number of different merchant vessels. Unlike your typical surface ship counter, these convoy points are not spending the entire turn sailing around the North Atlantic. You don't have these 4 convoy points here in the East Coast load up 4 resources and then sail to the edge of the East Coast, unload their cargo into the convoy points in the North Atlantic, who then drive across the North Atlantic until they hit the edge of the North Atlantic, where they unload their cargo and put it into these convoy points, which go there. That's not what's happening. What's happening is the ships that are represented by the various convoy points are actually constantly in motion back and forth from one destination to another throughout the course of the turn. So treating these as discrete ships with a limited movement allowance, if you will, is just simply wrong. It makes no sense and bears no resemblance to reality. Neither is it really even logical. So if you want to take the whole historically accurate or realism argument and set that aside, that's fine. It just fails under the basic logic argument. So what we're going to be doing is kind of taking a step back in time to pre-Ships in Flames regarding how we handle these convoy points. And there will be a convoy pipeline placement segment that will occur right after the reinforcement segment in the WiFCE phase of the turn, where major powers will simply be able to pick up and redistribute their convoy points as they desire, basically anywhere on the maps, to establish their convoy pipelines for that upcoming turn. This makes much more sense, and it avoids goofy things like having stacks of convoy points sitting in ports kind of scattered all over the world, or having convoy points arrive on map in the reinforcement phase and then take another 2 or 3 turns to actually get to where they need to be in order to be useful in shipping resources. So just to let everybody know, we're going to be ignoring the movement limitations of the convoy points. The pipelines are going to be laid out and rearranged as the major powers see fit by all the major powers at the beginning of the turn before we get into each of the individual ideological impulses. I'm also toying with the idea of implementing a house rule as far as convoy attacks go. I'm going to think about that, and if and when the time comes where it's going to be an issue, because right now, 1937, everybody's at peace. There's no Battle of the Atlantic imminently looming on the horizon. I've got some time to think this over, but you may see then, as we get deeper into this, a house rule that we have been using in the local group here for several years that feels a lot better than the way the official rules work as far as attacking convoys goes, and that's whether you're talking submarine attacks, surface, or air attacks. So if I decide to do this, I'm definitely going to be putting together a separate video outside of this playthrough where I will talk about this particular house rule, because it is a bit involved. I will dedicate a fairly short episode or video just on the subject of this proposed house rule, if you will. And for those of you that have been playing WiFCE long enough, I think you are going to recognize this, and hopefully you will see the merits of my arguments when I present this as to why I think this house rule that we've been using does a much better job of handling the convoy attacks and merchant shipping war than what they've done with the rules with the introduction of ships in flames back in 1995. So that's it, though. That's down the line. For now, just know that convoy points, we're going to ignore their movement. We are going to have a convoy pipeline placement segment at the beginning of each turn, and any other house rules I'll introduce to you as the situation arises. So with all of that stuff out of the way, we are actually now ready to begin with the political phase of January-February 1937. We'll start with a quick recap of the money on hand for the various major powers. Italy, surprisingly enough, leads the pack with a total of 6. Next comes Japan with 4, then the Soviet Union and France each have 3. The Commonwealth and China have 2, Germany with 1, and the United States has a total of -1. And those do reflect the corrections made from last turn's omissions. So with that, the major powers have recorded their bids for January-February. And I know I'm sounding like a bit of a broken record player here, but again, it's the lack of funds that is really putting a damper on the ability of most of the major powers to do a lot of political initiatives right now. And perhaps they've been spending a bit too much of their production on their naval programs, and maybe they should stop building quite so many ships, or at least slow down the number of ships they're laying down and shift some of those resources into political options. But we'll wait and see how things play out here. Of course, the biggest thing that's going to make a difference is actually gearing up their production. Getting those production multiples higher than where they are right now is going to be generating more income for them, which will allow them to do both more political options as well as continue to build up their military. Now, with all that in mind, Germany, which currently only has 1 mark on hand, she does have a number of political options she'd like to pursue, but with the shortage of funds right now, she's actually going to bid 0, essentially passing up this turn, and try to save some money for some bids over the next few turns to see if she can get some stuff done. Now, Italy is bidding, and if you recall, she's going to get 6 extra bid points due to her option play from November, December. That, combined with the 3+3 modifier here for her initiative position, gives her 9 before she even bids anything. So with that in mind, and considering the lack of funds that the other major powers have, Italy's going to bid just a single 1 money for her initiative this turn, knowing that that's going to give her a total of 10, and she's pretty confident that's going to put her at or near the head of the order this turn. Japan is in a similar situation. She's going to get 4 bonus points from her political option last turn, but knowing that the Italians are getting 6, plus they have the +3 here, which Japan will get as well, she doesn't see she doesn't think it's very practical to try to outbid Italy at this point, particularly since Italy is going to have those 2 extra bid points beyond what Japan is having. Plus, Italy has a lot more money. Well, not a lot more money, but she's got 2 more than Japan has in the bank right now. So with that, Japan is content to bid 1, keeping her bid costs as low as possible, and accepting what she anticipates to be the 2nd bid position here for this turn. She thinks that's going to be sufficient for her to do what she needs to do. Now, after that, the communists, as well as all of the democracies, are really kind of cash strapped right now. As far as the Soviet Union goes, they really don't have a lot of political options that they necessarily want to do right now. Those that they do have in mind are fairly, say, aggressive political options, demanding of territories, perhaps even some declarations of war on other nations. And in order to make those threats credible or practicable, she's going to need to continue to build up the Red Army. So I think for the time being, the Soviets are sort of pulling back from the political game and focusing more on building up the Red Army. So she's going to be passing with a bid of 0 this turn, and probably for the next few turns. As far as the democracies go, while the Commonwealth and France do want to advance their current treaty at least to level 2, that's going to take a little bit of coordination as far as both of them bidding to make sure that they can both get low enough initiatives on the turn that they decide to sort of go for it with that treaty. And that's going to require both of them to continue to save up some money. So they're sitting at 3 and 2 right now as far as cash on hand, and therefore they are just going to go ahead and bid 0 and pass on this turn. China and the US, again, don't have any really critical political options that they're looking to do right now, so they're just going to pass on bidding and save that money either for actual units or for some political options further down the road. So what that means is our political order for this turn, we have Italy bidding 1, getting +3 for her position last turn, and the 6 bonus with a grand total of 10, and that's going to be sufficient to put her in first place. Japan also bidding 1. She's going to get another 3 to make it 4, plus her 4 extra gives her a total of 8, and that's going to put her in the 2nd position. And those are the only 2 major powers that actually bid this turn. So from here on out, everyone else has bid 0. The United States, by virtue of the +4 modifier here, is actually going to fall down to 3rd position. Then in 4th position, we have Germany and France, which each get 2. So with the tie, Germany's political effectiveness being higher than France's, that'll push Germany up to the 4th position, and France is going to drop to the 5th position. And then in 6th position, we've got the Soviet Union and China both tied at 1 each. And again, the Soviet political effectiveness being higher than the Chinese, that's going to keep these at 6th and 7th. And then the Commonwealth, in last place, having bid 0, getting 0, has a 0 total. She will slide into the 8th position here. So now that we have the political initiative order determined for January, February, we see that Italy is first up, and we'll see what she decides to do with this opportunity. The Italians are going to select Italian option 2, gear up. Now, I've mentioned previously that Italy and Japan are the first two major powers that have an opportunity to gear up. That is not technically correct. Fascist major powers have no restrictions on when they can gear up. So it would have been entirely possible and legal for the Italians, the Japanese, or the Germans in this game to have geared up as early as January, February 1936. So then why didn't they? Well, there are a couple of other considerations in when you choose to gear up. And to explain this a little bit further, I want to take a look at the production multiples track, which I don't think we've taken a close look at yet so far. So let's head over there and I'll explain to you kind of the rationale of why Italy and Japan, for that reason, have waited until 1937 now to actually do their first gear up. So if the fascists are not restricted in when they can gear up, then why don't they all just gear up right from the beginning in January, February 1936? Well, the short answer is economics. And that's why I wanted to take a look at the production multiples displayed here a little more closely than I think we have so far. If you look here, we'll have the production multiple level tracks displayed for all 8 of the major powers. Every time a major power chooses the gear up option, the marker is going to slide into the next box to the right. Every time they choose the disarmament, it'll slide to the left. So each box represents a different production multiple level, and you can see that the production multiples themselves vary from nation to nation. At the beginning of the 1936 campaign, all of the major powers are at the first production multiple level, which is all the way here on the left. They range anywhere from 1/2 for Germany to 1/4 for the Commonwealth, 1/10 for China, all the way down to 1/20 for the United States. And you will see in each of the boxes here, we've got some colored circles up at the top. We can ignore those because those are only used when you're playing Days of Decision as a standalone game. Other than that, we also see that there is a year in each of the boxes, and some of the boxes here have abbreviations for various countries. Those refer to certain prerequisites that will allow the various major powers to gear up at certain times, because the communists and the Democrats do have some restrictions on when they are able to gear up. For every major power, however, they are free to gear up at the beginning of the year indicated in the box. If they do that, then the cost of the gear up is the printed cost. So in the case of Italy, it would be 7 money for her to gear up to the second production multiple level here, which raises her production multiple from its current 1/3 to 1/2 in January, February 1937 or later. If a major power chooses to gear up 1 year earlier than the year indicated, 1937 here for the Italians and the Japanese, the cost to gear up is twice the printed. So for Italy, that means that if she gears up in January, February 1936, she's looking at paying 14 rather than 7. And if you gear up 2 years prior to the printed date, you see 1940 here to take for Italy to gear up to the 4th production multiple level. If she decided to gear up rather quickly and reach this production multiple level, the peace sign here indicating that this is also the highest allowed production multiple while the major power is at peace. If she decided to gear up here in 1938 or earlier, well, in 1938 it would cost 3 times the printed amount. If she chose in 37, it would be 4 times, and so on. So to give you I guess a by the numbers breakdown of why Italy chose to wait until 1937 to gear up, she was producing 2 build points per turn with her current resources, factories, and production multiple of 1/3. That meant that in the course of 1936, she produced 12 build points total. Had she geared up on January, February 1936, she would move up to 1/2 production multiple, which would have allowed her to produce 3 build points per turn instead of 2. So a 50% increase in her production, which is really only 1 build point, unfortunately. But that would have meant she would have produced 18 build points for the year. However, in order to do that, it would have cost her 14 build points to do that gear up. So she would have netted a grand total of 4 build points for the entire first year. Now that she's waited till 1937 to do the gear up, she would produce another 12 build points, because she's still producing 2 per turn now, over the course of 1937 if she did not gear up. So 12 build points once again. Now that she's going to gear up, it's going to cost her 7, but she will produce 3 per turn, so that 18 minus the 7 gives her a net of 11 build points for the year. It's still 1 less than she would have produced had she not done the gear up. But one thing to keep in mind is now every resource that she can get her hands on is actually going to be worth more to her in terms of build points because of the higher production multiple. There's a decent chance that by the end of this year she will have made up the 7 build point cost of the gear up this year. There's no way she could have done that if she had done this in 1936. Even if she had done it at the very first turn of 1936, it would take her 14 build points would have been the cost. She had a net gain of 1 build point per turn. So the excess production she would have gotten from gearing up, it would have taken her 14 turns. That's over 2 years to make good the investment that she put into the gear up. So there is very much a cost and financial incentive for countries to wait at least until the printed year here for the various production multiples before gearing up. Now, Japan's gear up actually cost her 9 build points, so she would have been looking at an 18 cost if she had geared up in 1936, and she's currently producing, I think it's 3 build points per turn. When she gears up, I think it's going to go to 5, so a little better. Little better increase for Japan than Italy's going to see. But even Germany, you can see here, for her to gear up from 1/2 to 3/4, she's going to have to wait till 1938. If she were to gear up to 3/4 production multiple in 1936, it would cost her 30 build points, and that's not even, she doesn't even have that much at the start of the game. I believe she starts with 5 money on hand. Her credit limit is only 20, so that's a max of 25 if she went all the way into debt. And again, she would see an increase. We're talking from a production multiple of 1/2 to 3/4 of probably 2, maybe 3 build points per turn at the most, which would take her forever to kind of climb out of that hole. Meanwhile, she has other methods of increasing her production simply through reoccupying the Rhineland for one, as well as through minor economic agreements with various minor countries. So that's why you'll hear me say that Japan and Italy sort of had the first shot at gearing up, because again, while it's possible for a country to gear up early, and in some instances it may be necessary just to not allow your opponent to get a sizable production lead on you. But for the most part, it's very costly, and it's only under extreme circumstances that you really want to consider gearing up ahead of the year indicated here on the production multiple track. So I appreciate you bearing with me on that. I did want to take some time and just kind of explain how the whole gear up process works. And now that we've done that, we'll go back and continue with the Italian option 2 gear up. We'll see how this works, how much it costs, what the effects are on the various minor countries, and then proceed from there. Now you can see here, looking at option 2, there are a list of prerequisites. The first one here is, it says this option can only be played if A, you are a fascist, or, so this fascist then allows Italy to go ahead and gear up. But you can see the second 2 here are worth mentioning. The current year is greater than or equal to the year specified on the production multiple track, which is what we just looked at. In this case, it says 1937. Or the Commonwealth, France's, or Germany's production multiple level is above yours. Now, those are not, that's not the case here. Italy is able to use either of these first two prerequisites in order to conduct this or choose this option. But this is an example of what I was referring to, where various countries' prerequisites are tied to certain other countries' production multiples. If they become higher, it will allow them to do a gear up. And you'll see that for the democracies, they are either going to have to wait for the year to gear up, or in some cases, they may be able to gear up early, with other countries, notably the fascist countries, getting production multiples above theirs, or 2 levels above theirs. So with the prerequisite met, we see the cost here is 7. We're going to have to pay for it. Now, we've already deducted 1 for the bid, which dropped Italy to a total of 5. Paying the 7 here is going to take her down to a -2 on the money, but that's fine. She'll make that up in the production phase of this turn. And now you can see we have a number of countries that are going to be specifically affected by this. And the U.S. entry, since it's 1937, is going to be +8. So the U.S. entry level is going to increase against Italy by 8. I'm going to go ahead and record the, or place the control markers for these minor countries on the map. And you can see the effects of this is that it basically just increases your production multiple level by 1. So Italy is moving from 1/3 to 1/2, and we will see in the production phase how that's going to change the amount of build points she's going to be getting each turn from here on out. And again, the rest of the verbiage here basically just talks about the cost of gearing up early, which I mentioned before. So let me go ahead and place the influence markers for Italy here. And once that's done, the only thing really left to do is to then activate a minor country, and then we'll roll to see if Italy ends the political phase before Japan gets a chance to do her political option. Well, the Italian gear up had some interesting effects on the minor countries. You can see Portugal here actually liked it, getting 2 positive influence for Italy in Portugal. Spain, not so much. They've got a -1. Now, Austria, surprisingly, really liked it, and Italy picked up 3 positive influence in Austria. Yugoslavia, not terribly happy with it, with a -2. Hungary, again, they liked it, picked up +2 there. -1 in Czechoslovakia, +1 here in Romania. -1 in Bulgaria, -1 in Turkey, and way out here in Saudi Arabia, the Saudis liked it, and the Italians picked up +1 as far as positive influence goes there. So now the question is, which minor do they activate? And the 2 that really kind of come to mind where the Italians might get the most bang for their buck is probably either Austria or Hungary. And I think we are, of the 2, I think we're actually going to choose Hungary. So let's see what happens when we activate Hungary. We'll pick up the Soviet influence marker and the Italians, and we'll head over to the status display. Well, back at the status display, we've got 2 control markers here to resolve. We can see that Hungary actually is very close here to Italy. And we've got a Soviet marker, +1 Soviet, and a +2 Italian to resolve. And I think what we're going to do is go ahead and resolve the Soviet +1 first, because this should result in no effect. It's going to cost 2 for Hungary to move closer to the Soviets. There's no reduction in that. The only reductions you get are if it's moving towards you in your ideology, which it is not, or if it's moving away from every major power at war with the minor. Right now, nobody is at war with Hungary, so neither of those apply, meaning it's going to cost at least 2 to move Hungary a single hex. So that +1 for the Soviets is kind of blown off and wasted. Now we come to the +2 for the Italians. This is going to move Hungary closer to Italy. Now, it normally costs 2 to move a single hex. However, that's going to be reduced by 1 because Hungary is within the fascist ideology and it is moving closer to Italy. So the 2 drops down to 1. However, Hungary is crossing a barrier, or a border, from the authoritarian faction into the dictatorship faction. So that's going to increase it by 1 whenever you cross a boundary. So the base cost is 2, reduced to 1 because it's moving towards Italy in the ideology. +1 because it is crossing a boundary. That's going to leave the final cost of 2, which means Hungary will in fact move closer to Italy and become stacked with Italy. Now, what this means is, because Italy currently has an alliance with Hungary, if Italy goes to war with another major power, Italy will be able to select option number 5, minor joins in, which basically is the same effect as in a regular WiFCE game when you align a minor. So Italy would be able to bring Hungary into the war on her side, controlling her factories and resources as well as all of Hungary's military units. So a not insignificant development here. This is the first minor, as you can see, that has actually made it to one of the major powers' hexes to be stacked with them and controlled with them. Now, this probably isn't going to make Germany all that happy, and we'll see if Italy can retain their current hold on Hungary, but it is interesting to see a minor finally get stacked with a major, and we'll see what kind of implications that has going forward. Now, it is going to be very difficult, I think, to move Hungary out of this hex. It's going to require a lot of influence on the part of one of the other major powers to do so, which is one of the neat ways this whole system works with minor control. The deeper you can get them into your ideology, you can see the more boundaries they have to cross to get back out, which means it's going to take a lot of influence to shift that minor country out of that ideology. Whereas when they're in the neutral zone out here, they will be able to they'll be more liable to bounce around easier with less influence on the part of any of the major powers. So with that done and resolved, it remains just to see whether Italy ends the political phase here, and we'll go to the dice roll. Now, since no political option has been played prior to this, there's no modifier to the die roll, and it will end only on a 1. And as we see there, that is a 4, so the political phase continues, which means now it is Japan's turn to play a political option. And it shouldn't come as much of a surprise, considering how I mentioned previously that Japan and Italy both can gear up starting in 1937. So Japan is going to take the opportunity now to gear up at the first chance here in January, February. She's selecting Japan option 2, gear up. And you can see the prerequisites are largely the same except for C here, or it says Commonwealth's, Russia's, or USA's production multiple level is above yours. So a few different countries, and again, this is kind of unique for each of the major powers here. However, we don't have to rely on that prerequisite because we meet both A and B, of which we only needed 1. Now we can see here another difference in that this cost 9 for the Japanese. Now we had subtracted 1 for her bid, which dropped her to 3. So when we pay for this, that's going to lower her all the way to -6, which is the highest indebtedness we've seen from a major power thus far in the game. And then it just remains to implement the minor effects. You can see here not nearly as many countries are going to be affected by the Japanese gear up. However, the U.S. entry in 1937 is a whopping +13. So the U.S. does take a dim view of the Japanese gear up. And so what I think we'll do is I'll go ahead and lay out the control markers in the various countries. Again, we'll pick up over on the maps where Japan is then going to activate a minor country, and we'll then head to the status display and implement those influence markers. So we'll continue in just a minute. Well, the Japanese gear up affected fewer countries, but it is kind of interesting which ones were affected and how. We can see Siam here actually picked up +2, but they had previously had a +1 there. So Japan is sitting with a 3 positive influence in Siam. Now the Netherlands, probably because of their NEI possessions, took a dim view of the gear up, and Japan picked up -2 influence in the Netherlands as well as in Portugal, probably for their Pacific possessions as well. But other than that, the vast majority of the miners affected were in Central and South America. Mexico actually was somewhat favorable to it. The Japanese picked up one positive influence there. Venezuela was -2, giving the Japanese currently a -3 there. Brazil was not real happy with it with a -1. Neither was Argentina. However, Chile actually picked up another 2 influence. Combined with the 1 that Japan already had there gives her a +3. So now the question is, which minor do they activate? And they've got 2 countries that are sitting on a +3 right now. Don't really see anything else that would necessarily be favorable to the Japanese to activate. So the question is, do they want to activate Chile here and start to move Chile in their direction, or Siam? And I think, even though Siam is going to be more helpful to them, and probably because Siam is going to be more helpful, they're going to hold off, and they want to let that positive influence build up a little more, because I think given the location of both of these countries' markers right now, whichever one they activate, they're going to end up kind of wasting one of those positive influences. And if they're going to do that, I think they'd rather do it on Chile versus Siam, because again, the Japanese would be much more interested in getting Siam actively on their side, or at least they think that Siam would be of greater use to them than Chile, lying all the way on the far side of the Pacific. So with that in mind, and plus the United States is sitting here with a +1 influence, that will probably get blown off and wasted as well. So the Japanese are going to decide to activate Chile. All right, back at the status display, we have the Japanese 3 and the US +1. And again, I don't think this is going to matter too much which order we resolve them in, so we'll resolve the United States marker first. You can see the US marker is currently here in the center of the democracy ideology. There are no special modifiers to any of the movement costs, since no one has any alliances or is at war with Chile, and there's no borders to be or boundaries to be crossed. So it would take 2 to move towards the US. So this 1 is going to be just kind of wasted and eliminated. Now we will resolve the 3 Japanese, and that is going to be enough to move Chile 1 hex towards Japan. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So either of these 2 hexes will draw Chile closer. It's just a question of which one, and I think Chile's going to move it here into the hex with Sweden. It's going to keep it a little bit further from the democracies over here on the fascist side as it drifts towards Japan. And with that resolved, unfortunately, like I said, that 3rd influence point is going to be wasted because it won't be enough to move Chile another hex closer. That's going to wrap up Chile or Japan's political option. And at this point, we would roll to see if the political phase ends. However, the last card marker has reached the original, or the first last card marker over here on the initiative display, which means that the political phase is over, as none of the other 6 major powers bid this turn. And you can see here a quick look at the current money on hand after the political phase. Japan sitting here with a -6 and Italy with a -2. That's going to bring us into the World in Flames portion of the turn, and we will, there's not much going on again since the world is at peace. Italy is going to continue to bring back the rest of her expeditionary force down in Ethiopia. It's going to be a very slow turn. I don't really see anyone else doing anything really. I may adjust some of the convoy pipelines for the Commonwealth, possibly for France, but I don't think so. I think it's going to be another couple of turns before France has all of the tanker points she needs to bring in the Burmese oil from the Commonwealth. So maybe a quick rundown of the reinforcements that are arriving this turn, and then I'll just wrap up the WIF portion of the turn at the end, and that'll allow us to move on to the March-April turn. Well, the weather ended up being a 6 for January-February. That's going to be snow in Arctic and North Temperate, rain in the Mediterranean, fair in North Monsoon, and South Temperate with storms in South Monsoon. Not really going to have any impact on what goes on the map, since there's very little that's actually going to go on map this turn, but the impulse marker will go up 2 after each impulse here, and there will be a +1 to the next weather die roll. As far as initiative goes, surprisingly, the Democrats, even though they had a -1 and both the communists and fascists had +2, the Democrats actually won initiative and chose to go last. The communists lost initiative. They're going to end up going first, with the fascists coming second, and like I said, the Democrats bringing up the rear. So at least the Democrats don't have to worry about ending the turn again. If they do, it's not going to have any impact on the initiative modifiers. Now, as far as reinforcements go, we see the Soviets here get yet another infantry army. The Italians will get a transport unit that has completed its first cycle and will go into the construction pool, along with a Japanese transport as well. Then we have some carrier airplanes showing up for the Commonwealth, the United States, and Japan. I'm going to place those down here in the reserve pool for now, and we'll see whether or not any of those major powers decide to place them on map on a carrier. The Commonwealth gets a tanker point and a convoy point. The French also get a tanker point, and the Commonwealth gets the HMS Edinburgh into the construction pool, while the United States is going to add the USS Savannah and Philadelphia, a couple of light cruisers, to the construction pool. And then the Japanese will see the carrier Hiryu, and the Americans get the carrier Wasp into the construction pool. So that's it. Another heavily naval turn of reinforcements, except for the Soviet army here, which will probably end up in the Far East, just because right now, given the situation in Europe being so quiet, the Soviets are a little more concerned about Japanese, particularly after they gear up this turn. They want to make sure they're strong enough in the East to have some kind of a deterrent for the Japanese out there. So at this point, I will run through the WIF portion and give you a little update on what all occurs during that turn, as far as mentioning who actually ends the turn, and we'll see if that affects the initiative die roll modifiers for next turn. So back in just a minute. Well, the only thing that actually happened on the map was the Italians. They were the only major power that actually moved any pieces. You can see here the mechanized corps that had returned last turn from Ethiopia simply marched up to Rome. Meanwhile, the transport, the very slow transport that was in Taranto, sailed back to Ethiopia, made it as far as the Eastern Med here, and then during the return to base segment actually made it into Eritrea. So took the entire turn just to make that one-way trip. Other than that, that was it. Oh, also the Italians did, at the end of the reinforcement stage, they took their land bomber that had returned turn or two ago, and they decided to put that into the reserve pool, and that gave them a pilot in on the reserve track. So here's the bomber here in the reserve pool, and you can see that the Italians have a pilot on the track. The Commonwealth did decide to place the carrier plane that they just arrived on HMS Courageous, which will now give the home fleet some air-to-sea capability. And we've done basically everything else up to production at this point. So we'll go ahead and take a look and see how much each country is getting, and then take a look at what they're going to spend that on. There were two changes in major power production this turn, thanks to the gear up by both Italy and Japan. So just quickly here, Italy, as you can see, she still has 11 factories. She's getting 1 oil total from that's coming in from Romania. She decided not to use that for production. Instead, she's going to save that. So she's going to use all 4 of her non-oil here. So those 4 resources give her 4 production points. She gets +1 for being protectionist, for a total of 5 production points. Now that's going to be multiplied by 0.5 instead of 0.33. So her total build points went from 1.66, which was rounding up to 2, to now 2.5, which rounds up to 3. So Italy will be producing 3 from here on out until she gains more resources or does another gear up. And for Japan, her situation, again, she has 17 factories. She's getting 2 oil, of which she's going to use 1 for production, and she's saving the other one. She's also getting 9 non-oil resources, so there's a total of 10 resources being used for production. She gets that +1 for being protectionist, giving her a total of 11 production points. Now that's being multiplied by 0.5. However, that would be 5.5, which would round to 6 build points. However, she does have to send one of those build points to the United States as part of the trade agreement that she started the game with. So in reality, she's actually only getting 4.5 build points for herself, which is rounding up to 5. So she saw an increase from 3 to 5 build points. And everyone else's income remained the same. So let's see what totals that's going to give them here before we get into actual unit production. For production for everyone this turn, we'll start off with the communists. The Soviet Union is continuing to produce at 3, so that's going to increase her total to 6 build points right now. Germany is still leading the pack with 7. It's going to bump her up to 8. The Italians now producing 3. They're at, however, -2, so that's only going to leave them with +1 at the end of this production. Japan now increases her production up to 5, but again, that's going to leave her at -1. And then the Commonwealth is producing 5 again, so that's going to move her up to 7. France with 2 gets up to 5. The United States produces 3. However, she starts at -1, so that's going to leave her at 2. And then finally, China with her 1 bumps her up to 3. So the way things stand heading into the military production portion of it, Germany stands here at 8, Commonwealth at 7, Soviets at 6, France with 5, China with 3, the US 2, Italy 1, and Japan at -1. I'm actually going to go back and double check that Russian. I think they may be. I may not have paid for their infantry they built last turn unless they save some money. Let me go double check that. They'll either be at 6 or at 3. So we'll pick back up once the major powers have all done their builds, and I'll show you what they've decided to go with this turn. Well, having done the production for the various major powers, we'll just review what they actually put onto the spiral. I did go back and look through the Soviet production, and in fact had not paid for their infantry last turn. So instead of having 6, they only had 3. They decided to build a garrison unit for 2, which is going to leave them with 1 currently. Now the Germans only spent 2, and they decided to lay down another aircraft carrier hull here, starting the first cycle on that. It's going to leave them with 6 money for the start of March, April. Italy with only 1 is saving her money, recovering from that gear up she did this turn. The Japanese, however, even though they were sitting at -1 after paying for that gear up and getting their production for this turn, they decided to go in and they actually built a Marine Corps for a cost of 5, which puts them right back down at -6. Now, there can only be one reason that they are spending money on units, even though they are in debt, and that is that they are anticipating some military expansion in the not-too-distant future, and they really don't want to wait for these Marines to show up. So things could be looking to heat up sometime here in the second half of 1937 for the Japanese. But that does leave them at -6 still as far as cash on hand. The USSR, as we said, built the garrison here for 2. The French built 2 more tanker points, again trying to build up their tanker fleet to be able to get those 2 oil resources that the Commonwealth has been trying to send them each turn since they signed that level 1 treaty last year. Speaking of the Commonwealth, they did their standard build of one convoy point and 1 tanker point. They also began construction on yet another aircraft carrier. and they built a carrier plane, and that cost them a total of 4. So that's going to leave them with 3 money going into next turn. China built their first unit here, and it turned out to be a nationalist garrison unit, and that's going to cost them 2. Still going to leave them in the black with 1 yuan left. And then finally the U.S. laid down a battleship hull, and then they also built a carrier plane as well. And that's going to be a total of 2 for them, and that's going to leave them with 0. So that's it for January, February 1937. Moving into March, April, I think what I'm going to do, in the interest of not getting too long of time between episodes getting uploaded, I think even though we really only saw kind of the upgrades here in this particular episode, not much again happening on map, and probably isn't going to be happening for the next couple turns, still I think I'm going to go ahead and break it off here at the end of January, February, and then look to get this uploaded as soon as I can, and of course continuing then as I'm able with March, April coming up next. So I appreciate you all watching today. Thanks again. Take care, and we'll see you next time.